Hey guys, this is our Mastercraft snowblower, and we're going to be working on today. We're going to get it ready for a flip. We're going to sell it. It's got an 8-horse Tecumseh on it, 24-inch wide cut, and shot a couple of clips earlier. The way it's running, surging real bad when the choke is not on. If the choke's on full, then it runs pretty smooth but rich. So we're going to pull the carb off. We're going to clean it out, dunk it in the ultrasonic, and see what we can do with it, bring it back to life. But the augers look like they're in good shape. They look alright. Impeller's okay. I did just a quick function test. Everything turns, everything seems to work. It drives. The augers go, so we're going to give her a once over, clean up and paint, and we'll flip it, because it's getting near the fall here. And it's going to be market time for these. We'll give her a tune-up. The spark plug is old. I know it needs a new one. And the electric starter doesn't work. It just hums. But we'll see if it's not too crazy to fix that. We'll get that fixed up. My own personal snowblower has a electric start that I have never ever used. Usually they start 1 or 2 pulls, so no need for electric start. Anyways, let me get you set up in the stand. We're going to drain the oil. I did have it run in there for a little bit to warm up the engine. I want to dump all that old oil out of there and put some fresh in there and take her step by step. We're going to pull the carb off and do all that fancy stuff and get it in the drive. Make sure that's all tuned up, ready to go. Check the friction wheel, chains, lube everything in there, and get it ready. Alright, hold tight. We'll get you in the stand and carry on. So I did have it running, got the motor warmed up. On these things here, I usually put a 2x4 in the front underneath the auger housing just to give the motor a tilt backwards. This is your drain. Pull the cap off there and we'll just let her drain out. Pretty black. It was due. What we'll end up doing is after that drains out for a while, we're gonna flip the motor. I'm not gonna fill the oil until I can get the drives looked at. I'm gonna flip it up on its nose, and I'm gonna pull the belly pan off and go through all that. I don't want oil going anywhere, coming out with the dipstick tube or anything. So we're gonna drain it. And we're gonna deal with an empty engine for a while. We got a few things to do on the machine before we ever get to ready to run it again. So I'll let everything drain out and pull the carb off. We'll get that disassembled and dunked in the ultrasonic and cleaned out. It's ready for a good cleaning. So we'll catch up when I get ready to pull the carb off. Alright, so we're ready to take that carb cover off. There's on this one there's a 8mm bolt here, one over here, a couple of Phillips screws, and there's a wire underneath that we'll have to disconnect. Let's get these screws out of here first. Drop stuff in my magnetic tray. It's easier to keep track of things. So the throttle lever is out of the way. The choke knob, we have to it'll pull right off the shaft. Just be careful, this old stuff gets brittle. So that'll pull right out. Should be able to get those 2 8mm bolts out of there now. Those two. There are a difference in these, those 2 little 8mm ones. There's a coarse thread and a fine thread. This one here actually has a little drill point at the end, and that'll be the one that goes through the cover into the sheet metal of the engine housing. This one over here threads into aluminum, into a piece of the aluminum cylinder, so that'll be the machine screw one with the finer threads. The cover's loose. We're going to get this rod out of the way. just a little cotter pin on the end and a washer. This rod will slide out of the chute. That gives us a little clearance. The terminal for the wire is, this one's screwed on. Some of them are just a little spade terminal where you just unhook it from under here. This one here is a Phillips screw, so let's get a screwdriver in there. And it's just a hook terminal, so you just have to loosen that screw. A little hook there, just loosen the screw and that'll pop right out. Allows us to get our cover off. A little wire is the kill wire. So we're in a dirty carburetor. That's a main jet adjustment. It's seized. This is your air fuel mixture. Get you a bit of a close up here. See what we're into before we start tearing things apart. I'll get you out of the stand, might be easier. Okay, so there's the main jet adjustment. This is an older style one. It's adjustable, but it's tight. Can't turn it with my fingers, so we'll have to get a little penetrating oil in there, give it a little persuasion. This is the air fuel mixture here. In will make it leaner, out will make it richer. This is the idle screw, the idle speed screw. And you'll notice in that cover we took off, there's a screw here and the one here. Those are the ones that held it to the carburetor. But this access hole here and this one here are so you can make your adjustments with this cover on. You don't have to take cover off to make your carb adjustments as far as air fuel mixture and idle speed. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull, this is a primer tube. This little tube runs up under the housing and goes up to the primer bulb. Main fuel inlet is, hard to see, main fuel inlet is right here. Little snap band clamp. We'll just use some pliers and squeeze that and work it off. This primer line should come right off. It does. These lines are feeling very squishy. They're quite old. I have a feeling we'll be taking this front cover off and replacing that tube at some point. I think what I'll do is I'll take the whole manifold off. We'll get the whole carburetor out on the bench. We'll get it tore down and put it through the cleaner. So I was in the middle of taking that carburetor off with the whole manifold because it's easier to get these two bolts out and separate this later. Because to get in behind here, my screwdriver is too long and there's nuts and things back here. So I was just going to take that off. There's the governor linkage and the throttle lever is all connected here. But what I'm going to do is, there's only one linkage here that I need to disconnect. So what I did was, modern technology, there's numerous holes here and there's numerous holes here for these linkages to go. So I just grabbed my cell phone and took a quick picture of where they were before I took them apart. So then at that point, it's easier for me to reference that and go back to exactly where they were. Was in the middle of taking that fuel line off and it literally crumbled. So we'll be changing those fuel lines. At this point now, the carburetor's free. I've got the primer line is off, which is going to be replaced. The fuel line is crumbly, and that's coming off, going to be replaced. It's just a matter of unhooking this one linkage, and there's a Z bend at the end of this. It drops and comes back underneath the tab here, so it doesn't fall out. Well, everything else has been disconnected from the carburetor. Now it's just a matter of tilting the carb and working carefully, working that linkage out. There we are. You can see the Z bend there. You want to be extremely careful when you're working with a linkage, especially old linkage like this. You want to make sure that you don't change this bend. This bend right here can make the difference whether it's going to run properly when you put it back together or not. So just be gentle, be careful, try not to tweak anything. You don't want to change the adjustments, because it's easier to just go back to where it was than it is to try and looks like we had a critter in there. It's easier to go back to where you were and start from there, where we knew it ran, and than it is to start from scratch. So I'm going to clear off the other bench there. I got a couple of workbenches I can work on. I'm going to clear off the other one and get a light set up, get you in a stand, and we'll tear this down. I got the ultrasonic cleaner heating up already, and let's see where this goes. The gas is not old in there. It's pretty new gas, so it should be okay. Okay, let me reset and we'll get you fired up on the camera again. Ultrasonic's heating up. Just about there. Gonna get that carb disassembled and put into the bath. So, as I cut the last little segment there, I realized I gotta work over here on the bench, and it's wasn't very illuminated. So I took a quick pause, took 10 minutes, and I hung a shop light up. I ain't getting any younger. I need all the light I can get. And it works better on the camera. So what I've done already is I've taken some WD-40, some penetrating oil there, and I've sprayed the mixer screws. All the screws I'm going to take out, I've sprayed. I'm going to leave the choke bracket on. There's nothing underneath there I don't need to clean under it, so I'm going to leave that on. We're going to take this screw out here, this screw out on the other side with the backing of a nut, and we're going to start tear down. I've got my little jet tray, just a spray can lid with some holes in it. When I drop this in the ultrasonic, it'll fill up with fluid, even with the jets and everything in there, and the ultrasonic waves actually go right through that. So it'll work just fine. They do clean them out, no problem, even if it isn't in a little plastic bin. So I'll get you set up in the stand here, and we'll start tearing this thing down. Alright, let's get into this thing. First of all, I want to get things loosened. I want to make sure that things are moving. So this, usually you can turn with your fingers, but it was a little tight. It's moving now. So we'll count this. Half, 1, and a half, and a bit. 1 and a half and a bit. We'll get that taken out. So it's 1 and a half and just a little bit. Oh yeah, that's pretty dirty. Got some crusties on it. Sonic cleaner will take care of that. In the little tray it goes. Well, that's good. There's a little rubber seal in there. We'll pick that out in a second. I'll take this bracket off just to make it easier. It's not really in the way, but I don't want to argue with it. Little screw to the side. Not going to run those through the sonic cleaner, no need. Not necessary. Put those 2 little screws off to the side with the bracket. Notice there's a little washer sitting here. And that washer was right here under the spring. I will throw it in. You'll remember it was there. Let me know if I forget. Now we'll do our mixer screw. Count them. Oh, it's a little snug. There we go. Half, 1 and a half, 1 3/4. That was at 1 3/4. Let's get that out. Feels gummy coming out of there. Yep. A little washer on that one. Another dirty mixture screw. The head size is obviously different. This is a smaller head than the main screw. Makes it easy to figure out where they go. Grab a small pick and get those little rubber out of there. I have to try and reuse all this. I don't want to damage anything. Gently work that out of there. It's a little O-ring and it's stuck in the rust. There we go. We got her. Leave that off to the side. Have a look down in there. You see it? Try to get an angle for you. Pretty crusty in there. Okay, so I usually like to leave the bowl on until I get all the rest of the stuff off. That way I'm not twisting and moving stuff. I'm not disturbing anything inside there. I mean, I'm going to disturb it eventually when I get in there, but at this point I don't want to bend anything or lose any parts. So let's get this the upper manifold off of here. A little snug. This screw here, the reason I took it off with the manifold and everything is because it was going to be difficult for me to get this screw here when it was mounted to the engine. So I didn't bother. Took the whole thing off. This surface is clean. The gasket didn't get torn, so I'm just going to reuse it. I'll put just a thin little skin of RTV sealer on it when I go to put it back together. Same thing down here, because I'm going to split this off of the carburetor as well. Might as well pick this O-ring out of here while we're there. It's a little dirty. It doesn't look too bad though. And it's not falling apart, it's not cracked. So we'll save that. See a little bit of crud in there. Yeah, let's give this a knock, separate it. Trying to save the gasket. Gently now. Gently. Oh, one piece hung on. Ah, it's torn. Gasket's torn. Well, I'll probably make a new one. Either make a new one or just pick one up at the local store. They're not expensive. But if it's already torn and we're not going to save it, might as well get it off of there so it doesn't get into the sonic cleaner. Just keep things a little cleaner in there, make the fluid last a little longer. Just get some of that crud off of there. Good enough. No sense having those boogers floating around on the sonic cleaner. Okay. I'm not going to disturb the idle speed screw. Doesn't need to come out. It's fine. Bowl time. 7/16 on this bowl nut. I was having a hard time running off of choke, so I will not be surprised if we find something clogged up in here. Some of the larger pieces, on some of the larger jets, it's easy to see. It's this hole here. That's easy to see. Can we see light through it? Yeah, we can see light through it, but it is crusty. When you look through here, you can see light through there, but it is pretty crusty. There's a little tiny hole in the side, right there at the tip of my pick. I bet you that one's clogged. Wouldn't be surprised at all. I'm going to see if we can gently remove this gasket off of here. Again, I don't want to rebuild the carb. I don't want to put all new parts into it. I just want to clean it and get it working. More boogers in there. In the sonic cleaner it's going to go. Let's see if the bowl's going to come off nice. It's wiggling. I'm thinking I probably have to change this gasket. Usually it gets a band of corrosion between the O-ring and the bowl. Oh, that's a messy carb. Yeah. I wonder why that was having a problem. Well, there's your problem. All kinds of stuff is plugged up in there. Gasket is looking a little poor. That's not going to the sonic cleaner. I'll give it a good wipe. Use some WD-40 on it. Clean it off. It's actually still resilient. It still feels like rubber. It doesn't feel like it's hardened up, so that'll clean up and be reused. Grab a little rag here and wipe some of the junk out of this bowl. The whole bowl is going to go into the sonic cleaner, so we'll get some of the loosest stuff out of there first. Some of the crusties. I could hear the sonic cleaner bubbling in the background. She's just about up to temperature. Okay, that's going to go in. A little sticky. Let's see if I can get that pin out of there. Even the pin is rusty. Had water in it at some point. It's either introduced through the fuel tank or could be because of our ethanol fuel. I'm going to have to put that in the vise, in the soft jaws. Give her a little love tap. Which means I got to pull this off. Oh, that one was tight. Probably been in there since the day it was born. Oh, that one's going to be need a little more persuasion. Oh. Nope. Let me grab a hammer real quick. Oh, got her. What did I say last video? Last video, I said I need an easy button. I'll have to remember to get the one from the house and bring it out to the shop for the next time that something goes that easy. So that's going to come off. Set that to the side. Does not need to go through the sonic cleaner. Oh, that's a crusty carb. Alright, let's get her in the vise and try and drive that pin out of there. Alright, we got you flipped around with the camera. Here, I've got my soft jaws in the vise. These are aluminum backs with a rubber front on them. And there's tiny little magnets that actually hold it to the vise jaws. It's pretty handy. Let's get a little bit of penetrant on those little legs on the carb body. And gently persuade this. I don't want to break any. I don't want to break these legs off. Gentle. Oh, it's just starting to move. There we go. Nice. Nice, nice. That pin out of there. I'll drop that pin. I'm going to take some emery and I'm just going to clean that up just a little bit, and then we'll drop that in sonic cleaner too. Get the crap off it. Alright, let's get the needle and the float out. So this has a rubber seat with a solid metal needle. It's either going to have a rubber seat and a metal needle, or a metal seat and a rubber tipped needle. Most of the newer ones use a rubber tip. Let me get that needle into the pile over there of stuff to go to the sonic cleaner in our little jar. So these are a hollow brass float. They can sink, meaning they'll develop a crack in them. Either the solder will crack or the brass itself will crack and allow fuel in there, and then they sink, and then they'll constantly sit at the bottom of the bowl, and it doesn't meter properly. So you give it a shake, listen to that. Can you hear that? There's fuel in that float. That float is sunk. So it needs a new float, or they can be repaired. I've done it before. Actually, I had good success doing it before. And I'll shoot a video of that just because it's interesting. I can't see any cracks, but what I'll do is that in the little video on this, I will show you how to find them. Easiest way to find them, easiest way to fix them. The last one I did was actually on an old 89 Ford E350 motorhome, and it had like a barrel shaped float. So it was like a cylinder, and it snapped into a little ring on the sending unit in the fuel tank, and it had a bunch of cracks in it. So I brushed it off, cleaned it up. I did a bunch of soldering, testing, solder and test, solder and test. Cool. Solder and test, and then actually it worked pretty good. But yeah, so we know that's got fuel in it. So another step in fixing the carb. Right now we're going to go back over to the other side of the bench there, and we'll get the I'll get the jets and everything out of here. I'll get some penetrating oil in there, so we can get the jets and the emulsion tube out, and carry on. Well guys, unfortunately I didn't get any footage of fixing the float. It was giving me grief. Tried my usual trick of to find the leak. What that is, I usually will put the float in the freezer for a few minutes, get it nice and cool, and then I submerge it in a shallow tray of hot water, and it expands, makes the air inside the float expand, and then you can find the leak. Well, I didn't find a leak. There's definitely a leak somewhere because there was fuel in it, but I couldn't find a leak. So I went over it very, very carefully. I checked it. I can't find anything. A new float is only $5, but I'd rather fix one. What I did find under the water, the hot water, this is a factory hole in the float, and what they do is they drop a drop of melted solder onto the hole to seal it up. So I drilled through the factory stuff, but when it was in the water, it looked like there is possibly a little bit of foamy bubbles coming out of the factory hole. So I'm hoping that was it. But what I did was I cleaned the whole float, brushed it all down with Scotch-Brite. I drilled out the factory hole, cleaned the solder, and dropped another bunch of fresh solder on it. And it's been sitting in this gasoline with a socket on it to hold it down. It's been sitting in there for 12 hours. And nothing. There's no fuel in the float. I would think that after 12 hours it would probably have something in it. The fuel will creep into everything. I think that might have been it. We might have this licked. Down the road, if I need to replace it, they're $5. I can replace it. I'll just order one, have it brought in, and we'll go from there. I'll put a stock order together with a bunch of other parts too. Anyways, let's get this car put together best we can. I've already installed the float, a little rubber, sorry, not the float, the needle seat. A little rubber piece down in there. They do go in one way. They're like, they're tapered. So imagine this is the seat, the rubber seat. They are tapered like this, and the taper goes in first. And I've checked the needle, and there's no wear line around the tip. I wouldn't expect to see one on a metal needle in a rubber seat, but sometimes there used to be metal needles in a metal seat, and they would develop a ring right around where they seal. There'd be a ring around this needle, and that usually would give you grief. So let's get this popped together. Everything's been cleaned. Little wires have been pushed through all the jets, all the tubes, everything that needs to be done. I couldn't get the orifice tube out, but I blew a lot of compressed air through it, and I actually used a little spray carb cleaner as well after the sonic cleaner, just to make sure everything was good. Well, let's pop the jets in. This is our idle mixture. There's a rubber O-ring, and the brass washer, the spring, and then the screw. So if memory serves me, this one was 1 3/4 turns when we checked it before we took it apart. So we'll screw it in, gently seat it. That's a 1/2, 1 1/2, and 3/4. It's a good place to start there. Let's get the float and everything assembled. Get the needle hooked on the little tab there. This little tab on these brass floats, you can bend it. That'll adjust your carb float, adjust the height of it. If the float is set too low, you can actually starve for fuel. If it's set too high, it can overflow into the engine. There we are. Looks pretty good. We're looking for it to be just about parallel with the carb. It's a little low on this side. So what I'll do is I'll just bend that tab. I'll stick a screwdriver in there, just bend that tab a little bit. Carefully, don't want to crack anything. Use a smaller screwdriver. Pin's falling out. It's a little better. That little tiny difference is not critical. That'll work just fine. I'm going to test it now. This is the fuel inlet from the gas tank. In this position, the float should stop the flow of fuel. So I'm going to blow in here and see if it'll hold. And it does. And what I'll do is I'll put pressure on there, air pressure again, just blowing it, and then I'll lift the float to see if it allows it to flow. That's working pretty good, actually. Okay. At this point, we'll put our gasket on. I went around it, just cleaned the gasket up a little bit. It was a little crusty. Put our gasket on the carb base here. There we are. Is it nice? Okay, pins in, pins good. The bowls only go on one way. If they look like this, they only go on one way. The low part goes to where the pin goes through the float. like so. It's important. It's got to be on there right. Okay, it looks like it's sitting okay. There's our bowl nut slash jet. Our gasket back on there. Snug that down with 7/16 wrench. Not too tight, just snug. Main jet. It's got the O-ring on it, brass washer, and the spring. And I believe this one was 1.5 turns. You can thread it by hand now, which is nice. Lightly seated. And I'm just watching the slot and the screw. 1/2. 1.5. That's that. Everything moves free. I've blown air through all the holes, so everything there looks good. We'll get this side bracket bolted back on. We'll get it back assembled on the air manifold. And get it bolted back on the engine. Before we test run it, I gotta change those fuel lines. They're rotten, leaking. I don't want any problems later. Do it now while it's already half apart. And I showed you earlier on the cover, this carburetor cover that was on the engine, the big metal piece that went over it that had the key and everything in it. There was 2 holes in it in the side. So the 2 screws that held the cover to the carburetor, that's the 2 of them we removed. There was 2 holes this way. One hole you can reach your screwdriver in to get to the idle speed screw. The other hole you get the screwdriver in to get to the idle mixture screw. So you don't need to pull the cover off to adjust this carburetor. Fully adjustable carburetors. You don't see many of them anymore. That's too bad because it makes a big difference in ease of maintenance and tuning. Alright, it's together. I gotta get some fuel line on that engine, and we'll get a better camera angle, get you in the stand, and go from there. So what I got now is I had to make a gasket. The gasket that goes between this air tube and the engine was fine. The gasket between this air tube and the carburetor tore on me when I took it apart. So I had a roll of gasket paper. If you don't have gasket paper, a lot of times in a pinch you can use the backing from like a notepad. It's a nice thick cardboard. It's actually thicker than this in a lot of cases. That works pretty good. I've used that quite a few times. To get the holes, I just stuck a pencil down in here and made it ended up making a tiny dot, and I just used a 1/4-inch hole punch to make those holes for the bolts. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this inside circle. So I'm going to hold the gasket in place over the bolt holes as well as I can. I'm going to use a ball peen hammer. The smaller the better. You want to use the round part, just the ball peen part. And you just gently tap. And what will happen is it'll actually cut that paper. Make sure the holes are aligned. Yep, the holes are still good. It's just gentle, very gentle. Smaller hammer actually would be better for me. This happens to be the one I have, so. There we go. Perfect. Perfect size. Remember to get that part out. You don't need that. There you go. Nice homemade gasket. Works pretty good. let's get them bolted together, and we'll put the carb back onto the engine and move on to the next item on that project. Turn around here. Bench is a mess again. I'll get you zoomed in just a little bit there. This is not very interesting anyways. We're just bolting it together. Get our screws through. Again, the reason I took this whole air tube off with the carburetor is because I couldn't get to this screw easily when it was mounted on the engine. Nuts in the back. Still have to pull the tins off the engine. I'll pull the recoil starter off, pull the engine covers off, because I do have to replace the fuel lines. At some point, they're getting pretty bad. 1, 2, there we go. That should do it. This should be good to go. We're going to put this off to the side. Next shots we're going to be taking with the camera are going to be removing the tins and grabbing fuel line and changing that out. And carrying on with the project.